The purchase. Jake Collins was tired of living alone. Every day felt the same. Wake up, go to work, come home, eat dinner, watch TV, and sleep. His apartment was small and quiet, too quiet. He wanted company, but taking care of a real pet was too much work. One evening, while scrolling through an online shopping site, he saw an ad. Smart Pet, the perfect AI companion. No mess, no noise, just love and loyalty. The pet looked like a small, soft, robotic creature with glowing blue eyes. It could follow commands, talk, and even understand emotions. The reviews were amazing. People said it was better than a real pet and felt almost alive. Jake didn't think twice. He clicked Buy Now. The arrival. 2 days later, a large black box arrived at his doorstep. It had no company logo, no product name, just a strange silver symbol on the side. It looked unusual. He dragged it inside and placed it on the table. His fingers hovered over the lid. Why was he feeling nervous? It was just a pet, right? With a deep breath, he opened the box. Inside, wrapped in soft blankets, was not a robot pet. It was a girl. A small, pale-skinned girl with silver hair and glowing violet eyes. She looked no older than 10 years old. Her body was covered in a strange, soft material, like a futuristic bodysuit. Jake's heart pounded. What the hell? Before he could react, the girl blinked and sat up. Her large, glowing eyes locked onto his. You finally opened the box, she said in a soft voice. Jake stumbled back. Who? What? Where's my smart pet? The girl tilted her head. Smart pet. She looked down at herself, then at the box she had been sleeping in. Oh, I see. You didn't know. Jake swallowed hard. Didn't know what? The girl smiled, a knowing, almost sad smile. That I belong to you now. Not a normal child. Jake's mind raced. Was this a prank? A mistake? Had he just bought a human child by accident? He grabbed his phone to call the police, but before he could dial, the screen glitched. Lines of static ran across it. Then it shut off completely. What the? He tried again. The phone was dead. Please don't do that, the girl said. Jake stared at her. Did you just turn off my phone? She nodded. How? That's not possible. She shrugged, as if it was nothing special. I don't think you understand, Jake. His stomach twisted. How do you know my name? The girl's violet eyes glowed a little brighter. I know everything about you. The impossible truth. Jake felt cold. He took a step back, staring at the small girl sitting on his table. She didn't seem dangerous. She wasn't threatening him. But something about her wasn't normal. Who are you? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The girl hesitated, then spoke softly. I don't have a name, but I was sent here to be with you. Jake shook his head. That doesn't make sense. I ordered a smart pet. A robot. Not a. He gestured at her. Not a real person. She tilted her head again, thinking. I'm not a robot, she admitted. But I'm not a normal person either. Then what are you? For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she slowly raised her hand. The air around her fingers shimmered, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Jake's eyes widened as a small, glowing object floated out of the box and hovered in the air. He stepped back in shock. You're doing that. She nodded. I can do a lot of things. The floating object, a small silver sphere, slowly lowered into her palm. You wanted a companion, she said softly. And I needed a protector. Jake didn't move. He didn't speak. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a terrifying thought whispered. This wasn't a mistake. She was meant to come here. The final warning, cliffhanger ending. Jake took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Okay, he said. Maybe this is just a misunderstanding. Maybe I can return you to. No, The girl suddenly grabbed his hand. Her grip was ice cold. "You can't return me," she said, "and you can't leave me." Her glowing violet eyes met his, filled with something deep and unreadable. "They're already looking for me." A cold chill ran down Jake's spine. "Who?" he whispered. The girl's small fingers tightened around his. "The ones who will kill us if they find me." Jake's mouth went dry. Outside his apartment window, a strange red light flickered in the sky, and in the shadows beyond his front door, something moved. Strange abilities and the secret. Jake couldn't breathe. The small girl sat on his table, her glowing violet eyes locked onto his. Her words echoed in his mind. "They're already looking for me." Outside, the red light flickered again. The shadows near his front door shifted. Was someone out there, watching them? His instincts screamed at him to run, hide, do something, but his body wouldn't move. "Jake," the girl whispered, still holding his hand. "Listen to me. You need to trust me." Trust her. He didn't even know who or what she was. Before he could say anything, his apartment lights flickered. A strange humming noise filled the air, like a distant machine powering up. Jake's heart pounded. What's happening? The girl turned toward the window. "They found me." The impossible chase begins. A sudden knock echoed through the apartment. Not a normal knock. It was slow, rhythmic, mechanical. Jake's stomach twisted. He had a very bad feeling. The girl jumped off the table and grabbed his wrist. "We have to leave. Now." "Leave?" Jake hissed. "What the hell is going on? Who's at my door?" The girl didn't answer. Instead, she lifted her other hand. The air shimmered again, just like before, and suddenly, every single light in the apartment shut off. Total darkness. Jake froze. The knocking stopped. For a moment, everything was dead silent. Then, a loud crash. His front door was smashed open. Jake turned in horror as 3 figures stepped inside. They weren't human. They were tall, covered in sleek, metallic suits with glowing red visors over their faces. Strange symbols ran across their armor, shifting and flickering like holograms. Jake's body locked up. Who? No. What? Were they? The girl tensed beside him. "Hunters," she whispered. One of the armored figures raised an arm. A small device extended from its wrist, flashing blue. Jake didn't understand what it was doing, but his gut screamed danger. Before he could move, the girl suddenly grabbed his face with both hands. "I'm sorry, Jake." Then, the world around him vanished. The awakening, strange powers revealed. When Jake opened his eyes, he was no longer in his apartment. No red lights, no hunters, no broken door. Instead, he stood in a massive empty space. It wasn't a room. It wasn't even a place. It was just nothing. A vast, endless void of swirling purple and white mist. Jake turned, confused. Where? The girl stood in front of him, watching carefully. Her eyes weren't just glowing now. They were shining like stars. "I had no choice," she said softly. Jake swallowed hard. "What did you do?" "I moved us." "Moved us where?" The girl hesitated. "Not where," she corrected, "but outside." Jake's head spun. "Outside what?" "Outside your reality." He didn't understand. He couldn't understand. Was he dreaming? Hallucinating? Had he lost his mind? "No," the girl said, reading his thoughts. "You're not crazy." Jake inhaled sharply. She had done it again. She had read his mind. She watched him closely. "You're starting to see, aren't you?" "See what?" She took a slow step forward. "That I'm not human." Jake let out a nervous laugh. "Yeah, I think I figured that much out when you..." He gestured wildly. "Teleported us to some freaky space dimension." The girl tilted her head. "It's not teleportation." "Then what the hell is it?" She hesitated. Then, in a quiet voice, she said. I bent reality. Jake's stomach dropped. Bending reality. That wasn't possible. No, that wasn't just impossible. It was insane. But then again, was it really crazier than what he had already seen? The floating objects, the glitches in his phone, the way she had known his name before he even said it. Jake took a shaky breath. Okay, he muttered. I think I need a minute. You don't have a minute, the girl said. Her eyes dimmed slightly. I can't hold this place for long. The hunters will find us soon. Jake exhaled. Why are they after you? She hesitated. Then she lifted her hand again. This time, instead of floating objects, a glowing symbol appeared above her palm. It looked just like the strange symbol on the black box she had arrived in. Jake's eyes widened. That symbol, what is it? The girl closed her hand. The glow disappeared. I was never meant to be here, she admitted. I was hidden, sent away from my home. I don't know why, but her expression darkened. I know that if they find me, they will kill me. Jake felt cold. Something inside him whispered, she's telling the truth. Still, part of him fought against it. But why would they kill you? The girl hesitated again. Then, finally, she whispered, because I am the last one. Jake frowned. The last what? She looked up at him, her glowing eyes now filled with something ancient and powerful. The last of my kind. Jake's breath hitched. Before he could say anything else, the void around them shattered. The hunters had found them. The first threat. The world snapped back into existence around Jake. His stomach churned as he staggered, gripping his knees to keep from collapsing. One moment, he had been in that strange, endless void, listening to the girl's impossible words. The next, they were back. Back in his apartment. Back in reality. The door was still broken. The lights still flickered. And worst of all, the hunters were still here. Jake barely had time to process what was happening before a sharp metallic voice cut through the air. Tar GTLOCATED. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The three armored hunters stood in his living room. Their glowing red visors locked onto the girl. One of them raised a sleek, rifle-like weapon, blue energy humming at its barrel. Jake's instincts screamed. He grabbed the girl's wrist and yanked her behind him. Stop, he shouted, not even knowing what he was doing. Leave her alone. The hunter closest to him cocked its head, almost, studying him. Then, in that same cold, mechanical voice, it said, unnecessary life or dispose. Before Jake could react, the hunter raised its arm. A pulse of energy shot toward him. A blast of raw, blinding blue light. Jake's heart nearly stopped. This was it. He was going to die. And then, the girl moved. Faster than Jake could register, she raised her own hand and reality bent. The energy blast froze in midair, not blocked, not deflected, just stopped, hanging, motionless, like time itself had broken. Jake gawked. His mind couldn't understand what he was seeing. The girl's violet eyes blazed. You won't take me, she said softly. Then, she flipped the blast around. The frozen pulse of energy spun midair, then shot straight back at the hunter. Boom! The explosion ripped through the room. The hunter was thrown back, crashing into the wall with a metallic screech. Sparks flew from its armor. The other two hunters immediately raised their weapons. But the girl was already moving. She lifted both hands, and suddenly, the entire apartment began to shift. The impossible escape. Jake barely had time to react before the floor beneath him warped. 1 second, he was standing in his living room. The next, the walls, the furniture, the very air itself seemed to twist and fold. Jake stumbled as the entire space around them shifted, distorted, and vanished. For a fraction of a second, there was nothing but weightlessness, a strange floating sensation, like falling without gravity. And then they landed. Jake hit the ground hard, coughing as he scrambled up. His heart pounded. His vision swam. He was dizzy, disoriented, and completely lost. Because they were no longer in his apartment. They were somewhere else. Jake blinked in shock. A city street. It was night. Neon lights flickered above them. Tall buildings surrounded them on all sides, the air thick with the smell of rain and smoke. Distant car horns blared, and somewhere far away, people laughed and talked as if nothing had happened. Jake whirled toward the girl. What the hell just happened? He gasped. The girl exhaled slowly. I moved us again. Jake felt his head spin. You? How? The girl didn't answer. Instead, she looked up, scanning the sky. Jake followed her gaze and felt a fresh wave of terror. Above them, high in the clouds, a red light pulsed. The hunters were still tracking them. The girl's small hands clenched into fists. They're not stopping. Jake swallowed. Then what do we do? She turned to him, her glowing eyes unreadable. You have to trust me. Jake hesitated. Trust you? I don't even know your name. For a moment, the girl was silent. Then she whispered, My name is Rin. Jake exhaled. Okay, Rin. He forced himself to stay calm. What now? She looked at him, and for the first time, Jake saw something in her expression. Fear. We run. The chase begins. No more time for questions. Rin grabbed his wrist, pulled him forward, and they ran. Jake's lungs burned as they sprinted down the darkened streets. Behind them, the red light grew stronger. Then, a deafening sonic boom. Jake looked back just in time to see something huge streak across the sky. A hunter dropship. It hovered above the city, sleek and angular, glowing with neon red light. A hatch opened. Jake's stomach twisted. They're sending more. Rin didn't slow down. We have to get underground. Underground? Where? Trust me. Jake had no choice. He followed her. She led him through an alleyway, then down a hidden stairwell that he hadn't even noticed before. It led to a massive underground tunnel system, dimly lit and filled with the scent of damp earth and rusted metal. Jake doubled over, gasping for breath. Where are we? Rin looked around, scanning the space. Somewhere safe. For now. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead. He shook his head. I can't believe this. Any of this. Rin was quiet. Then she looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name. You saved me, she whispered. Jake blinked. What? Rin hesitated, then took a step closer. You didn't have to. You could have let them take me. You could have run. Jake swallowed. I don't know why I didn't. Rin tilted her head. Maybe it's because you were meant to. Jake frowned. Meant to. Rin glanced upward. The red glow was still faintly visible through the cracks in the ceiling. They're still coming, she murmured. And I don't know how long we can keep running. Jake clenched his fists. Then we need a plan. Rin looked at him. Slowly, she nodded. And in that moment, Jake knew. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Escape and revelation. The underground tunnel stretched into darkness. The air was thick with dampness, the scent of rusted metal and stagnant water lingering around them. Jake's breath was still uneven, his body aching from their desperate escape. He looked at Rin, the girl who wasn't human, the girl who had bent reality itself to save them. She stood a few feet ahead, her glowing violet eyes flickering in the dim light. She was listening, waiting. They're still looking for us, aren't they? Jake finally asked. Rin didn't turn. Yes. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead. Then why did we stop? Rin finally looked at him. Because you need answers. Jake blinked. What? She sighed, stepping closer. You don't trust me. Not fully. Jake hesitated. I mean, Can you blame me? I ordered a robot pet, and instead I got you." He gestured at her, a kid with glowing eyes and reality warping powers. "I don't even know what you are." Rin studied him for a moment. Then she knelt down and pressed her palm to the ground. The tunnel flickered. Jake's breath caught as the space around them shifted. The damp, decaying tunnel walls were suddenly replaced by open sky, distant stars, and a metallic city that stretched as far as the eye could see. He staggered back. "What?" "This is my home," Rin said softly. Jake's heart pounded. You teleported us again." "No." Rin looked up at the sky. "This isn't real. It's a memory." Jake exhaled sharply, realizing that even though they were standing on a street, he couldn't feel it beneath his feet. The sky didn't move. The stars didn't blink. Everything was frozen. A moment in time, replaying itself. A hologram of the past. "This is the capital city of my world," Rin said. It was called the Theris, a place of knowledge, power, peace. Jake turned, looking at the towering, sleek buildings made of dark metal and glowing blue energy. It was breathtaking. But something was wrong. There was no movement, no people, no ships in the sky. Jake's chest tightened. Where is everyone? Rin lowered her gaze, her hands curled into fists. Gone. Jake's throat went dry. Gone. Rin nodded. Erased. My entire species was wiped out. Jake's pulse spiked. "You wiped out? By who?" For a moment, Rin didn't answer. Then, in a barely audible whisper, she said, "By the ones who are hunting me." Jake felt his stomach drop. He turned again, looking around, and that's when he saw something in the distance. A massive shadow. At first it was just a dark, looming mass, barely visible through the mist. But then it moved. Jake instinctively stepped back. "What the hell is that?" Rin didn't look at it. "That," she said, "is what destroyed my world." Jake's mouth went dry. "That's a ship, isn't it?" Rin nodded. "Not just any ship. A Devourer-class Harbinger." Jake frowned. "Harbinger? What does that mean?" Rin's glowing eyes darkened. "It means Endbringer." A chill crawled down Jake's spine. "Wait, hold on. Are you telling me your entire planet was destroyed by one ship?" "Yes." Jake couldn't breathe. "How?" he finally asked. Rin finally turned to him. And for the first time, Jake saw something that shook him to his core. "Guilt. Because of me," she whispered. Jake blinked. "What?" Rin closed her eyes. "They weren't after my world. They were after me." The sky around them flickered, and suddenly, everything burned. The city, once magnificent and towering, was now in ruins. The buildings crumbled, flames licking the sky. The air filled with distant screams. Jake flinched. "Rin, stop this." "I can't." Her voice cracked. "This is what really happened." Jake turned, heart pounding. In the distance, the Harbinger loomed closer. It was no longer just a shadow. It was alive. The massive structure pulsed, shifting, revealing endless rows of red, glowing lights that flickered across its surface like a monstrous hive. It wasn't just a ship. It was something else. Something worse. "They wanted me," Rin whispered. "And when my people refused to give me to them, they destroyed everything." The memory dissolved. The tunnel snapped back into place. Jake gasped, staggering as the world around them became real again. The damp scent of the underground filled his lungs. The flickering lights overhead buzzed softly. But Jake felt different. Because now, he knew the truth. Rin wasn't just some alien refugee. She was the reason an entire civilization was wiped out. The truth hurts. Jake stood there, trying to process it. Rin just stared at the ground, her small hands trembling. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. Jake didn't respond. "I never wanted to be this." She looked up at him. "To be a weapon. Jake's chest tightened. A weapon? Rin hesitated, then slowly raised her hand. A small pulse of energy flickered around her fingers. Jake expected to see the same shimmering distortion as before, but instead, something else happened. The air around her hand rippled, and then shattered. Jake's eyes widened. The space itself had broken apart, revealing a void of nothingness. And for just a fraction of a second, Jake saw something inside that void. Something vast, something infinite, something that should not exist. Then, just as quickly, the space snapped back together. Jake shivered. Rin lowered her hand. "This is why they want me, Jake." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I can do things that shouldn't be possible." Jake swallowed. "Like what?" Rin's glowing eyes locked onto his. "Like destroy entire worlds." Silence filled the tunnel. Jake took a slow step back. "And you can't control it." Rin shook her head. "Not always." Jake stared at her. This wasn't just some alien girl on the run. She was dangerous. She was unstable. And worst of all, she was the single most powerful being he had ever encountered. Jake exhaled. His heart hammered. And then, finally, he asked the only question that mattered. "Are you going to destroy my world too?" Rin didn't answer. Not right away. But when she did, her voice was filled with something Jake didn't expect. Fear. "I don't know," she whispered. And that was the scariest answer of all. The betrayal and capture. The underground tunnel was silent, except for the distant hum of flickering lights and the faint sound of dripping water. Jake stood motionless, his mind racing with everything he had just learned. Rin wasn't just an alien. She wasn't just running from the hunters. She was the reason an entire civilization had been destroyed. And now, she was here, on Earth, in his life. Jake swallowed hard. If she really had the power to erase worlds, then what stopped her from doing the same thing here? Rin was watching him carefully. He could see it in her glowing violet eyes. She knew what he was thinking. And that scared him even more. "Jake," she said softly. He took a step back. She flinched. "You're afraid of me." Jake clenched his fists. "I don't." He stopped himself, because it was a lie. He was afraid. "I don't want to hurt anyone," Rin whispered. Jake wanted to believe her, but he also wasn't sure if she could control herself. Before he could respond, a sudden noise echoed through the tunnel. A faint, distant whirring sound. Jake tensed. What was that? Rin's eyes flashed. "They found us. Hunted." Jake barely had time to react before a red light scanned through the tunnel. The hunters. They had found them. Rin grabbed his wrist. "Run." Jake didn't argue. They sprinted through the narrow tunnels, weaving through rusted pipes and debris. The cold air bit at Jake's skin, and his lungs burned, but he didn't dare stop. Behind them, the whirring grew louder. Then, a mechanical voice echoed through the tunnel. "Fleeing is futile." Jake's chest tightened. He risked a glance over his shoulder. And his heart nearly stopped. The hunters weren't just walking anymore. They were floating. Their sleek metallic suits hovered above the ground, gliding effortlessly through the air. Their glowing red visors locked onto Jake, and Rin like predators stalking prey. Jake gritted his teeth. "This isn't fair." Rin pulled him forward. "Turn left." They veered down a side passage. The space narrowed, the walls pressing in on either side. The ceiling dripped with condensation, and the smell of damp earth filled Jake's nose. Then, a dead end. Jake's heart dropped. "Rin." She turned, eyes blazing. A split second later, the hunters arrived. 3 of them, their armored suits barely making a sound as they hovered above the ground. Their weapons glowed with charged energy. Jake took a step back. "Ah, Rin." Rin's breathing was unsteady. Her small hands trembled. Jake saw something flicker across her expression. something he had never seen before. Panic. "They have dampeners," she whispered. I can't use my abilities." Jake's stomach dropped. They had planned for this. The hunters raised their weapons. "Surrender." Jake clenched his fists. He wasn't going down without a fight. He took a step forward, and then everything went wrong. The betrayal. A new voice echoed through the tunnel. "Stand down." Jake's heart froze. That voice, it was human. A tall figure stepped into the dim light. Jake felt his blood turn cold. It was someone he knew. A man in his late 40s, with a sharp, calculating gaze and a confident smirk. He wore a long, dark coat, and strapped to his hip was a high-tech plasma pistol. Jake's breath hitched. "Dr. Kellen." Rin stiffened. Jake knew this man. Dr. Elias Kellen, a brilliant scientist, a former government researcher. A man Jake had once trusted. "Jake," Kellen said smoothly. "It's been a while." Jake's hands shook. You're working with them." Kellen smirked. "With them? No." He stepped closer. "They work for me." Jake's stomach twisted. Kellen turned his gaze to Rin. His smirk widened. "And you must be the girl everyone is so interested in." Rin's fists clenched. She took a step back. Kellen chuckled. "No need to be afraid, little one." His tone was mocking. "I don't want to kill you." Rin's glowing eyes narrowed. "Then what do you want?" Kellen's smirk disappeared. "I want to control you." Captured. Before Jake could react, the hunters moved. In an instant, they were on him. Metallic hands grabbed his arms, pinning him down. Electric cuffs snapped around his wrists, locking him in place. Jake struggled, but the cuffs burned against his skin, sending sharp, painful shocks through his body. Paralysis cuffs. He couldn't move. He could only watch. "No." Rin lunged forward, but Kellen raised a small device and pressed a button. Rin collapsed. Jake's eyes widened in horror. "Rin." She gasped, falling to her knees, her small body shaking violently. Her violet eyes flickered, her hands clawing at her head like she was in agony. Kellen knelt in front of her. "Fascinating," he murmured. "Your brain operates on quantum energy fields, doesn't it? That would explain why a simple neural disruptor is enough to shut you down." Jake's blood boiled. "Let hair go, you bastard." Kellen didn't even look at him. Instead, he pulled out a syringe filled with glowing blue liquid. Jake's breath caught. What is that?" he whispered. Kellen's smirk returned. "Something that will make her more cooperative." Jake thrashed against his restraints, but it was useless. Kellen leaned in closer to Rin. "Don't worry, little one," he murmured. "You'll be very useful to me." Then, he plunged the needle into her neck. Rin's scream echoed through the tunnel. Jake's world shattered. The final choice. Jake watched in horror as the syringe emptied into Rin's neck. She screamed. Not a normal scream. A scream that rippled through the air, distorting the space around her like reality itself was being torn apart. Jake fought against his restraints, but the electric cuffs sent another searing shock through his body, locking his muscles in place. His vision blurred from the pain. His ears rang. But he didn't care. "Rin," he choked out. She was convulsing, her small body trembling violently. Her violet eyes flashed between colors, shifting from purple to white, to black, and back again. The energy in the air grew thicker, heavier, unstable. Kellen watched with a fascinated smirk. Incredible. Jake's teeth clenched. He wanted to kill him. Kellen turned to one of the hunters. "Increase the containment field. I don't want her breaking reality just yet." One of the hunters tapped a device on its wrist. A translucent energy field snapped into place around Rin, locking her in a containment bubble. The moment it did, the air around them calmed. Rin's screams faded into weak gasps. Jake felt sick. "Let her go," he growled. Kellen didn't even glance at him. Let her go. He let out a short laugh. You don't understand what's at stake here, Jake. Jake's fists tightened. I understand that you're torturing a kid. Kellen finally looked at him. His smirk faded. A kid, he said, tilting his head. Jake, do you have any idea what she really is? Jake's jaw clenched. She's not a thing. She's Rin. Kellen sighed. You're thinking too small. She's not just an alien child. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. She's a cosmic singularity. Jake frowned. What? Kellen's eyes gleamed. She's the last of the ethereal. The word sent a chill through Jake's spine. Rin had never told him the name of her species. Now he knew why. Kellen continued, his voice dripping with excitement. The ethereal weren't just another advanced race. They were beings who could manipulate fundamental forces of the universe. Gravity, time, space, energy. And now, she's the last one. He turned to Rin, his expression hungry. And I intend to harness that power. Jake's breathing sped up. Rin barely lifted her head, her body still shaking. Her violet eyes met Jake's, and he saw it. Fear, not of Kellen, not of the hunters. Fear of herself. She didn't trust her own power. She was terrified of what she could become. Jake gritted his teeth. I won't let you use her, he said, his voice low. Dangerous. Kellen smirked. Oh, and what exactly are you going to do about it? Jake had no idea, but he was going to figure it out. The impossible choice. Kellen turned to one of the hunters. Prepare the next phase. I want to test how much power she can release under stress. Jake's stomach twisted. What does that mean? Kellen's smirk returned. It means we're going to push her to her limits. Jake felt ice crawl through his veins. You mean torture, he spat. Kellen shrugged. Call it what you want. The more stress she's under, the more her abilities activate. I just need to find the trigger. Jake felt something boil inside him. Rage, desperation, fear. He needed to stop this. But how? Then, Kellen turned to him with a mocking grin. You know, Jake, you're in an interesting position. Jake glared at him. Kellen crouched in front of him, lowering his voice. You have two options. One, you sit here and watch while we extract every ounce of power from her. He leaned in slightly. And trust me, she won't survive it. Jake's fingers curled into fists. Kellen continued. Or, you help me. Jake blinked. What? Kellen smirked. You get through to her. Convince her to cooperate. I don't need her in pain. I just need her to use her power on command. If she does that, she lives. Jake's heart pounded. Kellen spread his hands. It's really quite simple, Jake. Either you break her spirit, or we break her body. Jake couldn't breathe. Kellen straightened, turning away. I'll give you a few minutes to think about it. The hunters remained still, their visors glowing. Jake stared at Rin. She was trembling inside the containment bubble, barely conscious. He could still hear her screams in his head. She was just a kid, a scared, lost kid who had been running for so long. And now, because of him, she was trapped. Jake's hands shook. There had to be a way out. The escape plan. Jake took a deep breath. Think, damn it. Think. The cuffs on his wrists sent sharp pulses of electricity whenever he moved too much. His body was exhausted, his muscles stiff. But he still had his mind. And if there was one thing he knew, Kellen underestimated him. Jake's gaze flickered to the small control panel on the side of the containment bubble. It was linked to the hunter's command system. And the hunter's system was tech. And what did he know about Rin? She could manipulate technology. Jake swallowed, lowering his voice. Rin, he whispered. She didn't react. Jake leaned forward, forcing himself to ignore the pain. Rin, listen to me. She stirred slightly. Jake took a slow breath. You have to trust me. Her violet eyes opened just a little. Jake's voice dropped even lower. You can still fight. Rin's breathing was uneven. I can't. Jake clenched his fists. Yes, you can, but you have to believe in yourself. He looked at her, pleading. Rin, you are not a weapon. You are not a monster. You are more than that. A tear slipped down her cheek. I don't know how, she whispered. Jake forced a smile. Then let's figure it out together. Rin's eyes widened just slightly. Then, something changed. Her violet glow flared. The containment field around her glitched. The hunter's visors flickered rapidly. Kellen turned sharply. What the? Jake grinned. You messed up, Doc. Kellen's eyes widened. Jake clenched his fists, and the electric cuffs shattered. The hunters lunged. But Rin's eyes flashed white, and the entire facility exploded into chaos. The grand final. The world exploded into chaos. Rin's violet eyes blazed like twin stars. The containment bubble around her shattered, sending a wave of energy rippling through the facility. The metal walls buckled under the force. The ceiling lights burst, plunging the room into flickering darkness. Jake barely had time to react before the hunters collapsed. Their glowing visors flickered wildly, then died. Their bodies twitched, sparks flying from their suits. Their systems overloaded. They were completely disabled. Kellen stumbled backward, eyes wide. Impossible. Jake grinned. Yeah, you should really stop underestimating us. Kellen snapped out of his shock. He reached for his sidearm, a high-tech plasma pistol, and aimed it straight at Rin. Enough, he barked. Jake's breath caught. Kellen's finger tightened on the trigger. But Rin didn't flinch. Instead, she simply looked at him. The air around her rippled. And suddenly, Kellen's gun vanished. Jake blinked. Wait, what? Kellen looked at his now empty hand. His eyes widened in horror. The plasma pistol reappeared in Rin's hand. She held it calmly, tilting her head. Kellen took a step back. That's not possible. Rin raised the weapon. Neither is this. She pulled the trigger. A searing blast of blue plasma shot forward. Kellen barely dodged, throwing himself to the side as the blast grazed his shoulder. He hit the ground hard, clutching the smoking wound. Jake rushed forward, grabbing him by the collar. This is over, Jake growled. Kellen grimaced. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. And then, he smirked. Jake's gut twisted. No. Kellen still had something up his sleeve. The last trick. Kellen coughed, wincing. You think you've won. Jake tightened his grip. Yeah, actually. I do. Kellen chuckled. Then you don't know me very well. He tapped something on his wrist, a hidden control pad. Instantly, the entire facility began to shake. Jake's stomach dropped. What did you do? Kellen grinned. A failsafe, if I can't have Rin. A loud mechanical voice boomed over the speakers. Self-destructive sequence INNITIATED. T-mine was 120 CQNDS. Jake's eyes widened. You're insane. Kellen smirked. I prefer the term visionary. Rin stepped forward. We have to go. Jake's mind raced. 2 minutes. 2 minutes before this place became a crater. But then he looked down at Kellen. He was injured, weak. If they left him here, he wouldn't make it. Jake hesitated. Rin's voice was gentle. Jake, he won't stop coming after us. Jake's jaw tightened. He knew she was right. Kellen wasn't just some rogue scientist. He was connected, funded, resourced. If they let him live, he would come for them again. Jake had a choice. Leave Kellen to die, or save him, knowing he might betray them again. His fists clenched. What was the right thing to do? The final decision. Jake took a deep breath. Then, he grabbed Kellen's wrist and dragged him up. Kellen stared at him. You're saving me. Jake glared. Yeah, because I'm not you. Kellen let out a breathless laugh. You're a fool. Jake ignored him. Rin, get us out of here. Rin nodded. Her eyes blazed. The space around them shifted. The facility blurred. And suddenly, they were outside. The escape. They reappeared in the middle of a vast desert. Above them, the night sky stretched endlessly, filled with thousands of stars. The wind howled, carrying the scent of dust and open air. Jake stumbled forward, panting. Did we? Rin nodded. We made it. Then, a massive explosion rocked the horizon. Jake turned just in time to see a fireball rise into the sky. The facility was gone. Kellen coughed, still weak. He looked at the destruction in silence. Then, without warning, he lunged. Jake barely had time to react before Kellen pulled a small blade from his coat, aimed directly at Rin. But Rin didn't move. She didn't need to. The moment the blade was inches from her, it stopped. Kellen's body froze in place. His expression turned to horrified confusion. Jake took a shaky step back. Rin. Her violet eyes glowed like fire. I told you, she said softly. Her voice echoed through the air, filled with something ancient. I'm not a child. She lifted a hand. Kellen's body rose into the air. Jake's heart pounded. Rin. She didn't look at him. He won't stop. Kellen's face twisted. You can't kill me. You're too soft. Rin's fingers curled slightly. The air tightened. Kellen let out a strangled gasp. His eyes widened in fear. For the first time, Jake saw the real difference between them. Rin was something else. Something beyond human. Jake's breath was shaky. Rin, let him go. She didn't move. Please. Rin blinked. Her fingers relaxed. Kellen dropped to the ground, coughing violently. Jake exhaled. We need to go. Rin stared at Kellen for a long moment. Then she turned away. Jake hesitated, then followed her. Kellen didn't try to stop them. He just watched as they disappeared into the desert. And Jake couldn't shake the feeling that, somehow, this wasn't over. The aftermath. They walked in silence for a long time. Then, finally, Rin spoke. I could have killed him. Jake nodded. Yeah. She glanced at him. But I didn't. Jake met her gaze. No. She looked up at the stars. Does that make me human? Jake smiled, just a little. No, it makes you better. Rin's glowing eyes softened. And for the first time, she smiled back. The stars stretched out before them, and their story was just beginning.